Okay, so we're on a new section of the workbook, new contemplation. Um, Prior to our using the lesson as a way to focus our mind and open to, for many, um, direct sort of contact um, with reality, with creation, and to others. This is the means by which they're eliminating their fear of that contact through the reasonability of Jesus' divine logic, through the companionship that we are offering each other when we do these videos, and through the witnessing that we do um, for each other based on the experiences that we have. So it was interesting. I read this. It's so stark by comparison, and it's obviously a well laid out plan, and I can see why. So what we've been doing over the course of these last however long is fostering a condition in our mind, utilizing the divine reasonability of Jesus in his presentation of the truth of who we are, the truth of who our Creator is, the truth of who he is in relationship to us and our salvation, and the truth in regards to how we too can allow our mind to touch upon the Christ mind that Jesus has embodied, if you will, for a second, and begin to utilize the strength and love and understanding that translates, that the experience of that mind translates into within the world of space and time. And there's no more stark comparison or how is it, harsh sort of harsh tone than what the ego is and what the ego offers. And I think part of Jesus's plan in the way this is laid out is to help us, having gone through this, to free our mind, because many of us are having experiences. It's working in many of us. We're feeling, the love of God within us. Whether it's constant or not is not important right now. The fact that we're freeing ourselves from fear and guilt, utilizing forgiveness, the fact that our perception of what life here has been altered sufficiently so we no longer see ourselves as victims, the fact that in our new understanding of ourselves, we recognize an equality of the brotherhood of man and mankind. And we see that a common purpose ultimately is what we all work for, whether we are aware of it or not. Now, when you not work for it, in a sense, you work for the ego at a cross purpose. And the experience of that cross purpose is played out in the body and in your world. Okay? Now, when we read this, in a sense, you're going to see, you're going to begin to feel the harsh reality the ego fosters and its cruel dictates that get played out within you and your relationships, as opposed to the flow of creation and those moments of peace and joy that we have been spending with each other and with our Creator. So now the ego is, what is the ego? The ego is idolatry. It makes everything an idol, puts everything outside of you, gives everything a separate identity, causes you to feel like you are not whole. It's a sign of limited and a separate self, born in a body, doomed to suffer and to end its life in death. It is the will It is the will that sees the will of God. In other words, it is the will, small w, that sees the will, large W, of God as enemy and takes a form in which it is denied. So at every turn, the ego is in opposition to the will of God and takes a form to make the opposition seem more real than the will of God. The ego is the proof that strength is weak and love is fearful. Life is really death, and what opposes God alone is true. Exactly, that's what we're saying. The ego is insane. It's in fear. It stands, this is a great line, it stands beyond the everywhere, apart from all, in separation from the infinite. In its insanity, it thinks it has become victor over God himself, and in its terrible autonomy, it sees the will of God has been destroyed, mostly because where this gets played out is in your perception and in your projection of what is occurring in your world. And when you are in that state of mind, it feels like there is no God, and chaos has triumphed over the will of God and the law of God, because the law of God is nowhere to be found or seen. And the reason why that's true is because you've identified with the ego and fostered a condition wherein which opposition to God seems possible. But that could only be a dream if God's will is total, whole, and perfect, outside of which there is nothing. The Son of God is egoless. Now, remember, God's Son, when he talks about the Son of God, he's talking about you as you were created in the wholeness of creation. There's this idea in the Course that seldom gets spoken of, and I like to talk about it once in a while. There's an idea in the Course, and Jesus talks about how the separation occurs. And one of the things he says is, part of the mind, in a sense, that agreed with itself that separation was its reality, becomes concretized. And that concretization is what consciousness is. But the Son of God, being the totality of, let's call it the sum total of the souls that God created, in a sense, when we deal with the story of the prodigal son, there's an idea that there is a whole part, perfect part, composed just of perfect souls, as you are a perfect soul, and brothers who never were affected by the idea of separation. And that is you in your return. And that, as the Son of God, is egoless. What can he know of madness and death of God when he abides in him? What can he know of sorrow and suffering when he lives in eternal joy? And those two worlds can't possibly meet, nor can they communicate with each other. However, the drama of the restoration of that recognition and the integration of the awareness to make you safe within the purveyors of your reality as the Son of God is what the world of space and time seems to be. Okay? While those of us who are part of the fragmented and separated sonship begin to reclaim our sanity through the utilization of forgiveness, and the miracle begins to reunite all that was fractured and fragmented into the joy and experience of the single purpose for our reality, and which here we call salvation, and awakening from the dream so as to be restored to being that Son of God who is egoless. What can he know of fear and punishment, of sin and guilt, of hatred and attack, when all there is surrounding him is everlasting peace, forever conflict free, and undisturbed in deepest silence and tranquility. Now, there's a huge temptation on the part of people who begin to utilize A Course in Miracles to read a line like that and feel like they are a failure and are not meeting the criteria and never will be able to. Okay? This is not meant to judge your progress, because remember, Jesus himself says midterm marks are not recorded on your final record. And as he said, if you take him as your teacher, he assures you you're going to pass the final exam. Okay? I assure you're going to pass the final exam. And if you've become miraculous in your mind and heart and your dealings in the world, you will shorten the time that it takes for you to remember that you did pass your final exam, but you will learn to use conditions such as these. Okay, when he says, what can he know of fear and punishment, of sin and guilt, of hatred and attack? Conflict, forever conflict, flee and undisturbed. Okay, now, the ego would want you to judge yourself as a failure because in your mind, you're going to say, I'm not conflict free yet. I still have conflict. And I still get disturbed. And I don't have all the time the deepest sense of tranquility and silence. Okay? Now, the ego would use this to judge. The spirit would use this to help you remember that that is your natural state. And through forgiveness and the continued action of the miracle in time, we elevate and integrate our understanding of who we are beyond the voice of the ego as we go back through our mind and heal or forgive ourselves of those incidents that we constantly use to prove to ourselves that we're not the Son of God. Because we're not always tranquil. To know reality is not to see the ego and its thoughts, its works, its acts, its laws, its beliefs, its dreams, hopes, plans of salvation, and the cost. And the cost belief entails. That's what it wants to hide from you. It wants to hide from you the cost that the belief and all these things entail. Because if you knew the cost experientially, if you could remember what you were prior to you paying the price, you would remember the price was not being worth paid, and you would hasten the use of forgiveness and broaden the scope of what you allow it to act on, because you would understand that you lost the totality of your reality. And in the recognition of that reality and the restoration of it, there's no single problem ever, because that is the kingdom of heaven, where only love extends and where life is infinite and eternal. Okay? If you knew, and the moment you begin to have these experiences, the motivation will be the peace of God. That's why this course says peace is the goal of this course, because peace is the motivating factor. We all want peace, and when we achieve the peace of God, it's a peace that isn't disturbed. That doesn't mean that we're going to live there, but it does mean we're recognizing there's a reality that is not this one, wherein which there's a true, whole, perfect peace. And we could utilize that to help us sort out that which keeps us from experiencing that eternally. That's how we save each other. That's how we save the world. In suffering, the price for faith in it is so immense, the crucifixion of the Son of God is offered daily. At its dark and shining, blood must flow before the altar. Yet will one lily of forgiveness change the darkness into light? Yes. There's a moment in each and every one of us, and I know this is so because that moment is in me, and has occurred. There's a moment in each and every one of us when we finally do see the price that we have paid in the suffering that has accumulated in our recognition, in the pain that we experience, and the turmoil that we face each day, where we no longer want to pay that price. And there's an instant where full recognition, total recall comes to you and will light your mind to such a degree that you will know of the unreality of this world. And for an instant, you will be free from all fear and all guilt. Know yourself as God created you, and know God as your creator, and your brothers as that along with you, created whole and perfect. You will know that, and it will light up your mind, and that light will remain with you, even in the world of space and time, if for a second we forget. Because remember, we're going to elevate, we're going to raise up our bottom by using the forgetting to forgive that which has kept us down in the past, so that the past has become so free of fear and guilt and regret that the future can be brand new. And in that vortex of energy, peace will be restored forever to the holy minds which God created as his son. His dwelling place is joy, his love, completely his, completely one with him. Lesson 331, there is no conflict, for your will, for my will is yours. How foolish, Father, to believe your son could cause himself to suffer when it couldn't possibly be God's will. Could he make a plan for his damnation and be without a certain way to his release? You love me, Father. You could never leave me desolate to die within a world of pain and cruelty. How could I think that love has left itself? This is just a prayer. This is the prayer, the confession of one who has seen past the illusion of space and time, past the darkness into the recognition of the truth of the fact that life is whole, perfect, not undestroyable, eternal, and infinite. And this is not that. And this is the confession of one who has gone beyond the dream and come back to laugh at himself and help you to laugh at yourself as we remember to laugh at the ideas the ego presents to us of separation as proof that it actually occurred. And so we carry this light with us, and when we look out from that light and we see what the ego fosters in order to prove the reality of the world of darkness, we can laugh and free ourselves from the ego's dictates and be a light unto the world. Forgiveness shows us that God's will is one and that we share it. Let us look upon the holy sights forgiveness shows today, that we may find the peace of God. Amen. And those holy sights, what you're going to begin to see, I don't know how to talk this, right where you're viewing the world, right here, right in front of you where you're viewing the world, when the light enters and restores your spiritual eye to its natural activity, you'll see there's a whole nother interaction, world of communication, world where things are being restored, taking place where you previously thought the fragmentation of separation and the guilt and fear was reigning.